Hi everyone, I'm Mike from MTG Scribe, and I'm about to film my weekly news show that's going to go live on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. But I just finished the Exodus episode of The Receivables, and I wanted to make this video while it was still fresh in my mind. If you don't know what The Receivables is, it's a show hosted by Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan, and they go through the entire history of Magic the Gathering, focusing on one set at a time in chronological order. And for someone like me who's played this game since almost the very beginning, it inspires a lot of memories. And Patrick brought up that there is a turn one kill in Exodus constructed block using Hatred. And that reminded me of something. The story requires a little bit of setup, so I hope that you'll please join me traveling back to the year 1997. Much younger version of me, 15 years old, living in a town called Stafford, Connecticut, about 2 to 2.5 hours away from Boston, and about 3 to 3.5 hours away from New York City. So right smack in the dab of the middle of nowhere. I had been playing Magic for a few years at this point. I had some friends that played with me as well, but most of my cards I got from an electronics boutique in a few towns over. Which meant that I did not have very good cards at the time, because most of what they had was either Chronicles or Fallen Empires or Homelands. So that was the majority of my collection at the time. But in 1997, a new store opened up downtown called Scott's Collectibles. Mostly what Scott's Collectibles sold was sports cards and sports memorabilia. But it was owned by a guy named Scott and his father. And I don't know how old Scott was. At the time when I was 15, he was just an adult. But looking back, he was probably in his late 20s or early 30s. And he ran the store, but his father actually owned it. And Scott did not care about Magic or anything that wasn't sports for the most part. Now, his father, Mike, was more of a business-minded person. So when people started coming into the store asking about this game Magic the Gathering, he thought, there's an opportunity here. And then when they started stocking it regularly, and we were running the store very frequently, he thought, I could do something with this. Now, Mike worked for the town at the town hall as a janitor. That was his other job besides owning the store with his son, which meant that he had keys to the town hall. And he didn't know anything about Magic the Gathering. Just that it had a very dedicated fan base. But I did know a lot about Magic the Gathering. And if you know me at all, you know that I love being helpful. That was true even back then. To my serotonin-starved brain, there is nothing more satisfying than the feeling of accomplishment I get when I know that I've helped someone. So Mike asked me a number of questions about Magic the Gathering. Did I think there was enough people that they could get a play group together? Maybe attract new people from outside of town? And I said, yeah, I think we could do that. If we had a place to play, Scott's Collectibles was a very small store. We had a space for it. I think that we could probably start attracting people, since there was really nothing around, no other card stores in the area, no other comic book stores in the area, and we didn't really have anything. If you wanted to play any reasonably sized game, you had to drive a minimum of an hour to get somewhere that would have the space to do it and the fan base to do it. But I thought we could build something. I knew a couple people in school that played, and they had friends or family in the next town over in either direction. And I thought we could get probably about 10 people on the regular. And Mike said, great, I'll see what I can do. And Mike was able to talk the town hall into just letting us use one of the conference rooms every Friday night at 7 o'clock. People would come, they'd pay $5. We'd organize some sort of tournament. I would personally purchase the prizes from Mike's store, and then I would give them out. And even at 15 years old, I started running these, what eventually would become Friday Night Magic events. Now, we didn't have the most organization in terms of formats. We mostly played with what people had, but we over time slowly started getting more and more people. every Friday night. Eventually, by the time I moved away in 1999, we would regularly have between 30 and 40 people showing up Friday nights, to the point where we had to actually move the space from one of the smaller conference rooms at the town hall to the town hall auditorium room, which, with the stage and this giant hall area. We would have multiple tables set up. We would do these huge tournaments every week, and it was fantastic. Some of the best memories of me playing the game were from that era. But I was not a big competitive person. It was never something that was super interesting to me. So mostly I would run these tournaments. But another important thing is that around that same time, unlike now, where it's really easy to go online and get a deck list, net decking, essentially, you could go online at the time, but it was harder to find decks, harder to find good decks, and even if you could find good decks, it was harder to find the pieces to put together those good decks. I had what I'd like to call an addiction to a magazine called Inquest Magazine, which was run by the same people that did Wizard Magazine, which was focused on comic books. Inquest was their trading card game equivalent. I love that magazine. I don't know if it holds up. I've not read it in probably 20 years, but I love that magazine. I was obsessed with it. I read it every single month, and I look forward to it all the time. And one day, I was looking through the magazine, and they talked about this turn one kill combo, which was something that had existed. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time that I'd been playing regularly enough with access to cards that I thought that I could reasonably put it together. And the fact that it was a 6-card combo only added to the intrigue to me. It just made it much more interesting because it was so hard to pull off. But if you could do it, man, that must feel great. So I set about getting the cards for this combo. And I think I had most of them already going in. Truthfully, the hardest one to come by was multiple copies of the card Hatred, because it was a rare in Exodus, and people always thought that it was good. Lotus Petal, a lot easier to get a hold of, surprisingly. But eventually I assembled the deck. And another important thing is what the mulligan rule was at the time. When Magic first started, the mulligan rule was if you had your opening hand and it was all lands or no lands, you were allowed to show your opponent, and then you could shuffle your deck, recut, and draw 7 new cards and play with that. If you did that, your opponent was allowed to do the same thing regardless of what was in their hand. If they wanted to try to improve what they had, they could do that because you mulliganed. But that was the only time you were allowed to mulligan. Around 1997, this was changed to what is known as the Paris mulligan. Paris mulligan is you can mulligan your hand for any reason, but then you're only allowed to draw 6 cards. And if you mulligan again, only 5 cards, all the way down to 0 cards. And then obviously you can't mulligan anymore. And your opponent does not get the opportunity to mulligan at the same time. So because I had this 6-card combo, which, if you don't know, is Swamp, Raging Goblin, Hatred, Dark Ritual, Lotus Petal. So you play your Swamp, you play your Lotus Petal, or Mountain, it could work either way. You make a black and a red mana, that's the important thing. You cast a Dark Ritual with one of the black mana from the Dark Ritual. You cast a second Dark Ritual, that's 5 mana total. With the red mana, you play Raging Goblin, which is a 1/1 with haste. With the 5 floating black mana, you cast the card Hatred, which lets you pay any amount of life to give your creature plus X plus 0 until end of turn. In this case, you pay 19 life, you make a 21 goblin, swing for lethal, your opponent never has a chance. I tried to assemble this for months. 3 or 4 months probably. Every single week, every game I played, this is the only deck I played, I just could not get it to work. Unsurprisingly, it is a 6-card combo. To give myself a better chance, I would always mulligan down to 6 if I didn't have it in 7. If I was on the play, I would live with whatever the 6 was. And if I was on the draw, I would always go down to 5. Just on the off chance that I could draw into it. I got close a bunch of times, but I never quite got there. Until one day, 4-ish months after building this deck, I'm playing somebody that I had never seen before, never met them. I am on the draw. I mulligan down to 5. And my hand is Swamp, Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual, Hatred. I am Raging Goblin away from finally doing this thing that I've wanted to do for so long. It had become an obsession at this point. I had to do it at least once. My opponent goes, play a forest, they pass the turn. I draw. And it's a Raging Goblin. And I almost freak out. This is everything that I've worked for. Play that Swamp. Play that Lotus Petal. It's finally going to happen for me. Finally going to do the thing that I spent way too much resources to acquire, that I spent way too much time to get to, that isn't even really worth anything other than that sense of accomplishment. But even though it didn't mean anything to anybody else, it meant everything to me. I chained the Dark Rituals. I sacked the Lotus Petal. I put out the Raging Goblin. Now, again, it's been 4 months. People that go to this place with me are aware of what I'm trying to do. And at this point, we have a regular crew of about 20-ish people. Probably anywhere from 15 to 25, but probably an average of about 20 people. Most of them are there religiously every week. So there's a couple people around the table, and they see what's about to happen, and they know me. Again, I run the tournaments here. I give out the prizes. People generally like me there, and they're happy for me. Cast Hatred. Pay the 19 life. I have a 21 Raging Goblin, and people lose their minds to an extent that I did not think was possible. People are cheering. They're so happy for me. They're like, he finally did it. How exciting. This person that I'd never met before is taking all of this in stride. Mostly looks pretty bemused. Like, it's just one game. Like, who cares? But, like, to us that went there every week, it mattered. My desire for this to happen turned out to be infectious, and people really wanted this to happen for me. Swing out with my 20 power goblin. My opponent looks down at the goblin, and they look at the hatred in my graveyard. And they look me dead in the eye. And they don't break eye contact as they tap their forest and say, I cast Fog. I never played that deck again. And it would be 24 years before I ever sleeved up a deck that I did not build myself from the ground up. The Receivables is a great show. And it brings back a lot of memories. Not all of them are good ones. But they're all valuable. Have a great day.